I got a call from the bank at 3 p.m. on an ordinary Tuesday. The manager told me I had a $15,000 debt in my name, overdue by 2 weeks. I never asked for that money. My own daughter had stolen it by forging my signature. And the worst part, she had already spent every cent on a trip to Hawaii with her husband. Before we continue, subscribe to William's Revenge Stories. Activate the bell because we have new stories every day. Leave your like and tell us in the comments what city you are watching from. My name is Michael Reed. I'm 62 years old, and for the last 4 decades I have worked as a civil engineer in Chicago. I have built highways, bridges, homes. I have seen cities transform under my plans and my decisions. I have been a cautious, disciplined man who always fulfilled his obligations and expected the same from his family. But that Tuesday, the 19th of November 2023, everything changed. The bank manager's name was Charles Evans. His voice was professional, almost robotic. When he spoke those words, I will never forget. Mr. Reed, we are calling because your $15,000 loan is due today. The monthly payments have not been made since August. We need to resolve this immediately. I asked him to repeat himself. I didn't understand. I had not requested any loan. My accounts were in order. I had enough money, even some savings invested in pension funds. Sir, perhaps you don't recall, but the loan was requested 8 months ago, in March. We have your application here, your ID, your signature. Charles's words echoed in my head like a distant sound. March, 8 months ago. I was in Boston in March, working on a rehab project. How could I have applied for a loan in Chicago if I was out of town? I asked him to send me the documentation immediately. He agreed, but warned that if I didn't pay in the next few days, the bank would begin legal collection actions. I hung up the phone with trembling hands. It was a strange tremor, not of fear, but of profound confusion. I opened my email on the computer. There it was, a notification from the bank from March 2023, confirming the loan approval. The money had been deposited into an account I didn't recognize. During those first few minutes, I thought about fraud. I thought about identity theft. I thought about criminals operating on the internet. But there was something strange about all this. The money was not in a new account. It was in a sub-account that I had, but rarely used. A sub-account I had opened years ago when Emily needed help paying a college debt. Emily, my only daughter. She was 28 years old. She worked as a human resources advisor at a medium-sized company. She was married to Jason Miller, a 32-year-old man who worked in real estate sales. They had met 4 years ago at a social event. At first he seemed like a nice guy, though somewhat superficial, but I didn't want to judge. Emily seemed happy, and that was what mattered. I opened the attached file with the loan details. The application showed my full name, Michael Reed, my ID number correct, my signature, identical to mine. But my signature wasn't there. Someone had copied it. Someone who had access to my documents. I felt a coldness in my chest. It wasn't the cold of sickness. It was the cold of slow realization. The cold of seeing someone you loved from a completely new perspective. But I still didn't want to believe it. Maybe Jason had done something stupid. Maybe Emily had been deceived. I needed answers before making any accusations. I dialed Emily's number. She answered on the second ring. "Dad? What's wrong?" Her voice sounded normal, unconcerned. There was no guilt. There was no tension. That made me hesitate for a moment. "I need you to come to the house tonight. It's important." There was a brief silence. "Is everything okay?" she asked, in a tone that seemed genuinely worried. "I'll come after work. I'll be there at 7. I spent the rest of the afternoon printing documents, reviewing emails, tracking money movements. The $15,000 loan had been deposited into that sub-account the same day it was approved. And from that very day the money began to disappear. Small transfers, online purchases, deposits into other accounts, all meticulously recorded but also meticulously disguised. I found a receipt from a travel agency, Hawaii, flights for 2 people, luxury hotel reservation for 10 days, all confirmed for the month of June 2023. Just 5 months ago, my daughter had lied to me. Or worse, she hadn't lied to me directly. She simply had not told me the truth. and she had done something that could not be easily forgiven. She had stolen my identity. She had forged my signature. She had taken on debt in my name. She had gambled with my reputation, with my credit, with my future. When Emily arrived home that night, I was sitting in the living room surrounded by printed papers. Her face changed when she saw my eyes. She knew. Somehow, she knew that I knew. Emily walked slowly into the living room. Her body tensed when she saw the documents scattered on the dining room table. She said nothing for the first few seconds, just stood there, watching, processing. Then she looked at me, and in that instant, her expression changed completely. The confidence vanished. What remained was pure panic. "What is all this?" she asked, although she clearly already knew. Her voice had dropped to an almost inaudible whisper. "Sit down, Emily," I replied with a calm I did not feel inside. My tone was firm, the one I used years ago when she made childish mistakes. She obeyed without protest, slumping into the chair across from me as if her legs couldn't support her. I took the bank statement and placed it directly in front of her. I pointed to the loan approval date, March, 8 months ago, $15,000 that I supposedly requested. Then I showed her the application documents. "Your name doesn't appear here, only mine. My ID, my signature." I paused deliberately. A signature I did not make. Her eyes scanned the papers as if hoping to find an escape in the printed letters. There was none. The facts were there, unchangeable, concrete. I watched her swallow hard. Her hands were trembling slightly. "Dad, she began, but stopped. She didn't know what to say. The truth was too big, too obvious to deny. "Was it you?" I asked, although the answer was already clear in her silence. I waited. I needed to hear it from her own mouth. "Yes," she finally admitted, her voice breaking. "It was me, but it wasn't just my idea. Jason needed money for." I raised my hand. I didn't want to hear excuses. "Not yet. Continue." Emily took a deep breath. The words came out in a confused rush. Jason was in trouble. He had made mistakes at the office. Missing money in real estate transactions. His boss was going to file a complaint. They needed $15,000 to fix everything before it was discovered. The real estate business. Of course, that world of commissions, of pressure, of quick profits. I had heard stories about Jason, how he spent more than he earned, how he was always looking for the next big sale. But I never imagined it would come to this. "And so you decided to steal it using my name?" I asked, my voice sharper now. "It wasn't stealing," she protested weakly. "I knew you had money. I thought we could pay you back later. Jason said that in 3 months he would have enough commissions to pay it all back. He said it would only be temporary." I let out a bitter laugh. "Temporary? It's been 8 months, Emily." 8 months? The bank just called me today because they haven't received a single payment. The interest has piled up. Now I owe $16,000. Her face turned pale. She didn't know that. She didn't know the payments hadn't been made. That meant Jason had lied to her too. Or worse, that she had chosen not to check. I got up and walked to the window. I needed space. I needed air. From there I could see the streets of Chicago at dusk. People walking, living their normal lives, without betrayals, without forged documents, without lies piling up like snow in winter. "How did you do it?" I asked, without turning around. "How did you forge my signature?" The silence was long. Finally, "I had photos of your documents, from when you helped us open the bank account years ago. I printed one of the receipts, copied your signature, practiced many times until it looked perfect. Then I scanned it and attached it to the online application. I thought about that. She had planned, she had practiced. It was not an impulse. It was not a spur-of-the-moment mistake. It was premeditated. It was calculated deception. And the money? Where is the money, Emily?" She lowered her head. "Part of it went to pay Jason's agent, but we also bought tickets to Hawaii and a nice hotel. Jason said that after fixing everything we needed a break. We needed to recover, a trip. While the bank was looking for me, while the payments were not being made, while my credit history was deteriorating, my daughter was on a beach in Hawaii with my money, sunbathing, enjoying herself. The rage I felt at that moment was not explosive rage, the kind that shouts and breaks things. It was a cold, methodical anger, the kind that thinks clearly about consequences. It was the anger of someone whose trust had been irreparably fractured. "Does Jason know you came to tell me all this?" I asked. "No. He doesn't know the bank called you. When you get home, he'll probably get a notification that you requested information about the account. He'll realize—" I nodded slowly. Somehow, that fit. Jason was the type of person who would find out through automatic notifications before facing the truth directly. He was a coward in a salesman's suit. "Emily, I need you to understand something," I said, finally turning to look her in the eyes. "It's not just that you forged documents. It's not just that you stole in my name. It's that you did it knowing exactly what you were doing, knowing it was illegal, knowing it put me at risk. And you did it anyway because you wanted a trip to Hawaii." She began to cry, silent tears streaming down her cheeks. "I'm sorry, Dad. I'm really sorry. I didn't know it would be this serious," I thought. "You thought what? That you wouldn't find out, that things would just disappear." "I don't know," she admitted, barely audible. "That night I didn't sleep. I spent hours checking documents, researching legal options, calling a lawyer I knew. Forging documents is a felony. There could be criminal charges, there could be prison. But first I needed to understand exactly what had happened. I needed to see all the original documents from the bank. I needed to trace every dollar. What I discovered in the following days was even worse than I imagined. Jason hadn't just been in trouble for missing money. He had also used Emily's credit for other things: online purchases, payments to third parties. A part of the money had simply disappeared with no clear explanation. And his mother, Brenda Miller, had been on the Hawaii trip too. My money had paid for the trip of my daughter's mother-in-law, the mother of the man who had manipulated her to steal from me. That was the full truth, and that truth changed me forever. 3 days after that night in my living room, I summoned Jason and Emily to a neutral cafe, far from both our homes. I needed answers from both of them, not just my daughter. I needed to hear their voices, see their expressions, understand how deep the complicity went. They arrived together. Jason wore a gray suit that probably cost more than it should have. His hair was perfectly combed, a smile that vanished as soon as he saw me. Emily walked behind him, her eyes swollen, clearly not having slept well in days. They sat across from me at a small, light wood table, next to a window overlooking an upscale street. "Michael," Jason began, trying to sound casual, as if we were meeting for a social reason. "Emily told me you had a call from the bank. It must have been a misunderstanding." "We're already in the process of—" "Misunderstanding?" I interrupted, pulling out a copy of the loan application documents. I placed them on the table between us. "What do you call forging my signature on a $15,000 contract a misunderstanding?" Jason's face transformed. His tone became more defensive. "Look, I know it seems serious, but we really just needed a little money to solve a complicated situation. We planned to pay it back immediately. The commissions I was expecting came through, but there were some delays in closing transactions, and—" "Where is the money?" I asked sharply. Jason exchanged a look with Emily. She was looking down, fidgeting with the coffee cup that had just arrived. "Part of it was used for what needed to be resolved at work," Jason explained. "But most of it is in Emily's account. It's still there, Michael. We haven't spent it all." That was a blatant lie. I had access to the bank statements. I knew exactly where every dollar had gone. The tickets to Hawaii cost $3,300, the hotel $5,800, food and activities another $1,200. That adds up to $10,300, all paid with my money in June. I saw Jason lower his head briefly. Then he raised his eyes, and in them was a mixture of shame and defiance. Emily needed a break. She had been working very hard. I thought she deserved a special trip. A break? "Jason, do you know what I deserve?" My voice was low but firm. "I deserve respect. I deserve honesty. I deserve for my identity not to be used for criminal transactions." "It's not a crime," he protested, though his tone suggested he didn't believe that himself. "It's a loan between family. Things just got complicated." "It is the crime of forgery," I replied, "and the bank is already considering legal action. I've spoken to my lawyer. If I don't pay the full debt in 2 weeks, they will file a formal complaint." Emily finally raised her head. Her eyes were teary again. "Dad, Jason can pay now. He received his commissions. We can have the money in your account by the end of the month." "Commissions?" I asked. From real transactions or transactions that covered up previous problems? The silence was deafening. Jason didn't answer. That was confirmation enough. Let me make something clear to both of you, I continued, straightening in my chair. For 28 years I have been your father, Emily. I have raised you, educated you, supported you in every important decision of your life. I helped you with college, with your first apartment, with your emotional crises. I was always there. And this is what I get in return. Dad, please, she began, reaching her hand toward me. I pulled mine away. It wasn't an aggressive gesture, just deliberate. And you, Jason, you've known my daughter for 4 years. I should have taught you that there are lines you don't cross, that family is not a personal emergency fund, that when someone makes a mistake, they must face it with honesty, not with more lies. You're right, Jason muttered, his head bowed. We made a mistake, a big mistake, but we can fix it. Give us time. Time doesn't fix everything, I replied. Time only shows who you really are, and what I see here are two people who have no problem deceiving someone they supposedly love for money and vacations. Emily began to cry openly now. People at nearby tables started to look. It's not like that, she protested through sobs. I have always loved you. Jason pressured me. He told me it was just temporary, that no one would find out. I didn't want to do it, but you did it, I finished for her. And that's what matters. The excuses don't matter. It doesn't matter who pressured whom. You decided to forge documents. You decided to steal my identity. You decided to travel to Hawaii while leaving me with a debt that I now have to manage. I stood up from the table. They both tensed, expecting more, but there was nothing else to say at that moment. I am going to pay the loan. I am going to handle everything legally. But you two need to understand that things have changed. They have changed permanently. What do you mean? Emily asked in a small voice. I mean, I need time to think, time to decide what your place in my life means after this. So I will contact you when I am ready. Until then, do not contact me again. I walked to the door without waiting for a reply, but at the last moment Emily got up and ran towards me. Dad, wait. Please, we can fix it. We can talk. We already talked, I said, turning to her, but keeping my distance. The only thing left now is for you to understand that every action has consequences, and yours are just beginning. I left the cafe in the rain that had started to fall. I didn't have an umbrella. I let the water soak my clothes, my face, my hair. As I walked through Chicago towards my office where I had a pile of legal documents waiting for me, I felt something I hadn't experienced in many years. The absolute certainty that a relationship I thought was indestructible had shattered into 1,000 pieces, and that those pieces would never fit together in the same way again. Innocence had been lost, both hers and mine, and in its place was only the raw reality. That family does not automatically protect you, that love can be used as a weapon, that trust, once betrayed, is almost impossible to recover, and that sometimes the most painful thing a father can do is admit that his daughter has disappointed him beyond what he can tolerate. After leaving the cafe, I went straight to the police station in the Gold Coast neighborhood. I couldn't wait any longer. I couldn't let the situation drag on indefinitely while Jason and Emily cooked up new lies. I needed to formally document what had happened, establish an official record that would protect my name and my reputation. The station was a gray, functional building, with hallways that smelled of disinfectant and institutional fatigue. I asked to speak with someone from financial crimes. After waiting 45 minutes in an uncomfortable plastic chair, I was seen by an officer named Monica Velasquez, a woman about my age with a serious, professional expression. I showed her all the documents. The loan application with my forged signature, the bank statements, the receipts from the Hawaii trip, the printed email communications where Emily mentioned the plan. Monica reviewed each one meticulously, taking notes on her computer. This is quite clear, she commented after reviewing everything. We have document forgery, which is a felony under the criminal code. There is also fraud, because the falsified identity was used to obtain an economic benefit. And depending on how the documents were altered, we could include computer crimes as well. What is the next step? I asked. I am going to generate a report on this. Then it will be sent to the corresponding court. The judge will decide whether to open a formal investigation. If so, we will summon both suspects to give a statement. We will need you to provide your current contact details and sign a sworn statement. I spent the next hour answering detailed questions. Monica asked me about my relationship with Emily, about Jason, about whether I had been a victim of other crimes before, about the state of our financial relationships. I answered everything precisely, without omitting details. What was particularly important was when I mentioned the trip to Hawaii and the involvement of Jason's mother. Jason Miller's mother was on the trip too? Monica asked, looking up from the screen. Yes, Brenda Miller. My daughter mentioned she was with them. The tickets were for 3 people, although initially the application was for money to solve one of Jason's problems. If his mother also traveled, it means the money was used for more things than Jason initially admitted. Monica nodded slowly. This could indicate a broader, premeditated scheme. If the mother was involved or knew about the fraudulent origin of the money, that could make her an accomplice. We will investigate it. After finishing the statement, Monica gave me a case number and explained that I should expect a call when the court made a decision about opening an investigation. This could take 2 to 4 weeks, she warned. The courts are quite saturated, but since we have clear documentation and the crime is relatively straightforward, an investigation will probably be opened. I left the station with a folder in my hand containing copies of my statement. I had crossed an important threshold. It was no longer just a family matter, a question of disappointment and domestic betrayal. It was a legal matter, official, registered in the police systems. That meant Emily and Jason would face real consequences. 3 days later, I received a call from Monica informing me that the court had decided to open a formal investigation. 2 detectives would be assigned to the case. A second meeting was scheduled to provide additional documentation if necessary. Most importantly, the suspects would be summoned to give statements within the next 15 days. It wasn't an arrest, it wasn't prison, but it was official, it was serious. When Emily found out from an official court notification, she called me. Her voice was trembling. Dad, how you filed a complaint? Did you really file a complaint against us? Yes, I replied simply. How could you do this? I'm your daughter. Jason is your son-in-law. We're going to have legal problems. This could affect our jobs, our reputations, everything. You should have thought about that before you forged my signature, I retorted. Dad, please, understand this is serious. We could go to prison, they could convict us. This isn't a lesson, this is destruction. I heard the panic in her voice. Part of me, a small part, felt something like compassion, but most of me felt coldness, methodical coldness, because she was right about one thing. It was serious, and it should have been serious from the moment she decided to forge documents. Emily, you and Jason committed a crime, a felony, not an administrative offense. The consequences of that are not my responsibility to soften. They are your responsibilities to face. Will there never be forgiveness? Will you never change your mind? I don't know yet, I admitted, but I know that withdrawing the complaint now would only send one message, that you can commit crimes against me, and if you feel a little sorry, everything is fixed. I am not going to teach you that. I hung up before she could answer. That night I called my lawyer, Edward Martin, a man who had worked with me on various legal matters over the years. I explained the full situation, and asked him to represent my interests in the legal process to come. It's going to be tough, Edward warned. The courts are often sympathetic in family cases, especially when the family pushes to withdraw. There will probably be multiple calls from you asking to drop the complaint. You are going to face emotional pressure. You need to prepare for that. I'm prepared, I replied, though I wasn't entirely sure it was true. But what I did know was that I had reached a point of no return. I had activated formal legal mechanisms. I had set the wheels of justice in motion. And now, regardless of my feelings about Emily, regardless of the pain I felt, those mechanisms would continue to move forward. I couldn't stop them, even if I wanted to. And I discovered that I didn't want to. Because every time I thought about that trip to Hawaii, about my savings spent on beaches and hotels, while I was managing a growing debt, I felt that doing the right thing was the only thing I could do. Even if it meant my daughter faced criminal consequences, even if it meant our relationship would never be the same again, the formal investigation moved slowly, as I expected. Over the next 3 weeks, the detectives worked on gathering additional information. They spoke with bank employees, reviewed digital security systems, analyzed transaction patterns. I provided all the documentation I had, including old emails, archived text messages, and any communication that could serve as evidence. What emerged during the investigation was even more complex than I had initially imagined. The detectives discovered that Jason hadn't just had a missing money problem at his company. He had been committing small frauds for over a year, overbilling clients, diverting commissions, forging transaction documents. His company had finally detected it, but before taking legal action, Jason had negotiated an agreement. He would pay back the missing money, about $19,000, and leave without them filing a criminal complaint. The deadline for payment was the end of June. That explained the urgency of the forged loan in my name, which occurred in March. Jason needed time to get the money, time the company was willing to give him. When I received this information from Monica Velasquez during a meeting at the station, I was silent for several minutes. "Does that mean my daughter didn't know exactly what the money was for?" I asked. "Probably not the whole truth," Monica replied, "but she knew it was to solve Jason's problems, and she knew it was urgent. That should have been enough to make her wonder why he couldn't wait for normal solutions. But the most revealing part came when they began investigating Jason's travel and expenses. The detectives traced transactions after the initial loan. They found that besides the trip to Hawaii in June, there were other suspicious expenses: luxury purchases at clothing stores, reservations at exclusive restaurants, a significant deposit into a bank account in the name of Brenda Miller, Jason's mother, made in April, $5,000 transferred directly. When I asked Monica about that, she frowned. "That deposit is interesting. If Brenda received money from the fraudulent loan without your authorization, then she becomes an accomplice, at least for unjust enrichment." "Are you going to investigate her too?" I asked. "We are going to summon her for a voluntary statement. If she refuses, we can make it a mandatory summons, but first we want to hear her side of the story." The summonses to testify were officially issued. Emily received hers via certified mail. Jason too. And Brenda Miller received a summons from the police questioning her about the origin of the $5,000 deposit. When Brenda was questioned, her defense was simple but effective. She didn't know the money came from a fraudulent loan. Jason had told her it was a gift, that he had gotten a bonus at work. She had believed him without checking. It was a plausible explanation, though likely false. However, without hard evidence that she specifically knew about the forgery, it was difficult for the detectives to prove her direct complicity. What did become clear was this: Brenda knew the money came from somewhere. She knew Jason was in trouble. She knew he was looking for money in unorthodox ways, and she had accepted it anyway, without asking uncomfortable questions. That, even if not technically a crime, revealed her character. It revealed that she was part of the culture of deceit surrounding her son. When Emily was formally questioned, her version of events changed slightly under the pressure of official questions. She admitted she knew more than she had initially revealed. She knew Jason was in serious trouble at work. She knew he needed money to fix things. Although she didn't know all the details, she had chosen not to ask too many questions. "Why?" the director asked during the interrogation, according to the report later shared with me. "Why didn't you want to know?" "Because," Emily replied, "if I didn't know exactly what was wrong, then it wasn't entirely my fault, you understand? Jason asked me to apply for a loan using my father's name. He told me it would be temporary. He told me no one would find out. I knew it wasn't right, but I didn't want to confront him. I didn't want conflict." "So you chose to break the law to avoid conflict with your husband," the detective observed. Emily did not respond. What I learned from those interrogations was something that hurt me deeply. My daughter had not only committed a crime, she had deliberately chosen not to think about the implications. She had chosen to close her eyes. She had prioritized her relationship with Jason, her comfort, her desire to avoid conflict, above her responsibility to me. That was perhaps worse than if she had acted out of pure malice. Because malice can be understood, it can be anticipated, but deliberate indifference, chosen blindness, is much more devastating. It was as if she had decided that my well-being, my name, my reputation, were not worth bothering to protect. Edward, my lawyer, called me after reviewing all the investigation reports. "This is going to be an open and shut case," he said. "The prosecutors are definitely going to press charges. Both will be formally charged." "What does that mean for sentencing?" I asked. "For forgery and fraud of this magnitude, you would generally expect between 18 months and 3 years in prison." But since it's a first offense for both, and prosecutors often negotiate, they might reach a deal. It would probably result in suspended sentences, community service, fines. But they will have a permanent criminal record. That will affect their jobs, their records, their future lives. I hung up after that. The idea that Emily would spend the rest of her life with a criminal record, that it would follow her in future jobs, in references, in opportunities, left me with a strange feeling. It wasn't satisfaction exactly. It was more like a confirmation that lasting damage had been done, but it was damage she had caused first. I was just allowing the consequences to run their natural course. That night I walked the streets of Chicago, with no specific destination. I passed the station where I had filed the complaint. I passed the cafe where I had confronted Jason and Emily. I passed the park where we used to walk together, when she was a child, when her biggest problems were what flavor of ice cream to choose. And as I walked, I thought about all the small decisions that lead to moments like this. I thought about how the people we love can become strangers. I thought about how trust, once broken, leaves scars that don't fade. By the time I got home, it was already midnight. I had a glass of red wine in my silent living room, surrounded by the memories of a life that no longer existed, and I waited for what would come next. As the investigation moved toward its inevitable conclusion, I took measures that had been on my mind since the first moment I discovered the forgery. I could not allow Emily to continue having access to my finances, my documents, my life. I needed to protect myself from future betrayals. I called Edward and asked him to prepare a series of legal documents. The first was to remove Emily from all shared bank accounts. We had a joint account for years, initially designed to help her as a student, and then kept for emergencies. That account was closed. I transferred the funds to a new account at a different bank, under only my name. The second step was to review my will. Emily had been named the primary beneficiary of my assets more than a decade ago. That changed. Edward prepared an amendment, where everything would go to charitable foundations and educational institutions. If Emily wanted anything from me after my death, she would have to demonstrate genuine change, real remorse, transformation. But for now, there would be no inheritance for her. The third step was to consult about a restrictive power of attorney that would prevent any of my children, had there been others, from acting on my behalf or representing me in legal matters. I signed documents specifying only Edward as my authorized legal representative in case of incapacitation. No one in my family would have any power. "Are you sure about this?" Edward asked when I presented my instructions. "These are very drastic measures, particularly changing the will." "Completely sure," I replied. "Emily has shown she cannot be trusted. I am not going to leave her anything that might tempt her to act in questionable ways again." "Would you reconsider these changes if she genuinely repents? If there is reconciliation?" "No," I said clearly. "This is not about temporary punishment. It is about establishing permanent boundaries. It is about making her understand that her actions have consequences that last a lifetime. Not just legal, but personal. Not just economic, but relational." Edward nodded slowly, although I could see in his expression that he thought perhaps it was too severe. But it was my decision. It was my life. Oh, meanwhile, a fourth document was being prepared. A formal petition to the bank to investigate the security procedures that allowed someone to forge my signature online. The bank was partially responsible for not verifying the authenticity of the signature or for not contacting me to confirm the request. I initiated a formal claim against them for negligence, not because I expected significant money, but because I wanted it on record that they had allowed someone to commit fraud in my name. In early December, I received an official letter from the bank. They had reviewed their procedures and found that indeed, from March to June, their online system lacked additional biometric verification. It had been a transition period where they were updating their security. Emily's loan application had been placed right in that period of vulnerability. The bank formally apologized and offered a small compensation, $1,500, in recognition of the incident. I accepted the compensation, but rejected their offer to close the matter without further action. I instructed Edward to continue pressing for them to implement more rigorous security measures. It was not for revenge. It was for corporate responsibility. In the second week of December, Emily called the house. I answered. "Dad?" Her voice was tense. "I tried to access my shared account with you, and it's closed. What happened? Was it a bank error?" It was not an error, I replied. I closed the account. Why? I had money in there, money I had saved. That money is safe. It is in an account under your name at another bank. Your lawyer will receive the details so you can claim it. My lawyer? She asked, confused. Why do I need a lawyer to access my own money? Because from now on, everything between us will be handled legally, I explained. There will be no more familiarity. There will be no more trust. Only formal legal processes. It's cleaner that way. There was a long silence. I could hear her rapid breathing. Dad, this is insane. I'm your daughter. You can't just cut me off like I'm a stranger. I can, and I am doing it, I replied. I have also changed my will. You are no longer a beneficiary of my estate. When I die, everything will go to charitable institutions. I have instructed my lawyer to handle my affairs, not you. I have placed restrictions on my bank accounts. You are free to live your life, but without access to me or my resources. Are you erasing me? She asked, her voice breaking. I am setting boundaries, I corrected. There is a difference. You are still my daughter biologically, but you are no longer part of my family in the sense that matters. I am no longer your father in the sense that implies responsibility, support, inheritance. You are a person who committed a crime against me. That is what you are now. I can't believe you are doing this, she sobbed. Will there never be forgiveness? Maybe, I said, though I didn't feel it, but not now, and not soon. You would have to do much more than apologize. You would have to prove that you truly understand what you did, why it was wrong, and that you have a fundamentally different character. That would take years, decades, possibly a lifetime. I can't live like this, she whispered. You should have thought about that before you forged my signature, I replied, and then I hung up. I hung up gently, without drama, without explosive anger, just quiet determination. Because in that moment, as I ended that call, I realized my decision was already made. It was not reactive. It was strategic. It was the only way to ensure she understood the magnitude of what she had done. The legal documents were signed before a notary that same week. Everything was in order now. Emily could try to sue. She could try to reverse the decisions, but Edward had ensured everything was done legally, irrevocably, shielded against future attempts at change. And as I went through those weeks, with every signature, on every legal document, I felt something I had not expected. Peace. Not the peace of vendetta or revenge, but the peace of someone who has finally established clear boundaries. The peace of someone who has decided that certain damages cannot be repaired, only contained. Emily would have to learn to live without her father's support. She would have to understand that trust, once lost, is not recovered simply with apologies. And she would have to live with that reality every day of her life. In January 2024, the court issued a final summons. Both Emily and Jason were called for a summary trial hearing. The formal charges had been filed: forgery of documents, swindling, bank fraud. Brenda Miller was not formally charged, although it was noted in the record that she had been investigated for unjust enrichment. The day of the hearing was cold and gray, typical of January in Chicago. I arrived at the downtown courthouse with Edward. Emily was in the hallway waiting with her lawyer, a young man named Javier Romero, who had been court-appointed. Jason was with her, formally dressed, but with the expression of someone who knew exactly what was about to happen. When Emily saw me, she tried to approach. I raised my hand to stop her. Edward stepped discreetly between us. Now is not the time, he murmured. The courtroom was small, functional, without the dramatic solemnity you see in movies. The judge, a man about 65 named Henry Morales, reviewed the documents with a neutral expression. The prosecutors presented the case systematically, without emotion, just facts. Signature forgery, fraudulent deposit, fund transfers, conspicuous spending without legal justification. Then it was the defense's turn. Javier Romero, Emily's lawyer, presented mitigating arguments. First offense, complicated family circumstances, pressure from Jason, genuine remorse. Jason's lawyer presented something similar. Negative influence from his mother, previous financial problems, but full acknowledgement of guilt. What was particularly uncomfortable was when Emily was called to testify. Her lawyer had advised her to express genuine remorse, to beg for clemency. She did, but in a way that sounded rehearsed, practiced. "I made a serious mistake," she declared from the stand. "I didn't think about the consequences. I didn't think about how this would affect my father. I only thought about solving the immediate problem. I sincerely ask for forgiveness." The judge listened without changing his expression. Then he asked, "Do you understand the seriousness of forging identity documents? Do you understand that this is a crime that could result in prison?" "Yes, I understand now," Emily replied, tears on her cheeks. "Did you understand it when you forged the signature?" There was a pause. "I suppose on some level, yes. But I chose not to think about it." That was what shattered any defense argument she might have had. Because the truth, by her own admission, was that she had known exactly what she was doing. She had just chosen not to face that reality. The judge leaned back in his chair. "Miss Reed, you had an advantage that many people do not have. A family that supported you financially. Your father was apparently generous with you, and your response to that generosity was to steal from him using his identity. That is not a youthful mistake. That is a deliberate violation of the most fundamental trust." When he issued the sentence, it was clear but not severe. For Emily, 18 months of prison, suspended conditionally for 3 years of probation, a $3,000 fine, and a permanent criminal record. For Jason, the same sentence. Both would have to report monthly to a probation officer. Both would be in the criminal records for life. What was more important than the suspended prison sentence was the conviction, the record, the criminal history. That meant that every time Emily applied for a job, every time she had to do a background check, this would appear. That meant her career as a human resources consultant was effectively over. Who would hire someone with a record for fraud to handle human resources? When we left the courtroom, Emily tried to talk to me again. "Dad, please, I need you to understand. The sentence is suspended. I'm not going to prison. We can work on this. We can rebuild." "No," I interrupted. "The suspended sentence is a legal technicality. The important thing is that you now have a permanent criminal record. The next time you try to get a job, that will show up. Every time you apply for credit, that will show up. Every time you try to do practically anything that requires a background check, I will be there, reminding you of what you did. Is that your goal?" "To ruin me?" she asked, her voice bitter now. "My goal was for you to face consequences," I replied, "and you are facing them. Now you have to live with that." Jason remained silent during all this, staring at the floor. When I passed him, he didn't even look up. He was a professionally destroyed man. His real estate firm had fired him as soon as they learned of the criminal charges. His hopes of a career in that field were dead. Brenda Miller, who had been watching from the gallery, approached Emily and put her arm around her. It was a gesture of a mother protecting her child. It was the only moment of genuine compassion I witnessed that day. In the months that followed, Emily's life transformed radically. She lost her job. The company she worked for decided they could not keep someone with a criminal record in a human resources position. She tried to get another job, but every time the record appeared, the doors closed. Her friends, many of them colleagues from the same professional industry, began to distance themselves, not out of malice, but out of caution. Associating with someone criminally convicted is not good for one's career. Jason faced a similar fate. He would never work in real estate again. Most companies in that field require extensive background checks. With a criminal record, he was effectively excluded. Their marriage deteriorated rapidly under the pressure. Without income, without prospects, without the life of luxury they had imagined, the cracks that already existed became chasms. 3 months after the sentencing, Emily informed me through her lawyer that they were in the process of divorce. What was interesting was that Emily never tried to blame Jason for everything. She took her responsibility, at least in the legal aspect, but that didn't change anything. The blame had been shared, but the consequences were permanent. When I heard about the divorce, I felt no satisfaction. I didn't feel like I won. I felt an empty coldness, because I had achieved exactly what I had set out to do. I had destroyed my daughter's life as it was, not physically or violently, but systematically, legally, in a way that was irreversible. And I discovered that this destruction did not feel like victory. It felt like the price we both had to pay. She for her betrayal, me for the loss of a daughter I no longer recognized as such. After the sentencing and Emily's divorce, I implemented a policy I had been considering for a long time: total silence. Do not answer her calls. Do not read her messages. Do not acknowledge her attempts at communication. It was a form of silence that went beyond just not speaking. It was the active denial of her existence in my life. Emily tried to contact me in multiple ways. Phone calls I let go unanswered. Text messages I didn't read. Emails that were filtered into a folder I never checked. She even tried to show up at my house one Tuesday afternoon. I opened the door, saw her face, and simply closed it without a word. Her lawyer, Javier Romero, finally sent a formal letter requesting that we meet to resolve pending differences and explore possible reconciliation. I instructed Edward to reply that there was no interest in any meeting, that any future communication should be handled exclusively by legal representatives, that the father-daughter relationship was over and would not be reestablished under any circumstances in the short term. The coldness was deliberate, systematic, and absolutely effective. What was interesting was discovering how a person lives when they are completely ignored by someone who was once central to their life. Through indirect contacts, I learned how Emily was dealing with the silence. During the first few months, she tried to fight against it. She called more frequently. The messages became more desperate. In one she wrote, "Dad, I understand you are furious. I am paying for what I did, but this is inhuman. We are family, please, just let me explain. Please, just give me a chance." I did not reply. After about 4 months of unsuccessful attempts, her tone changed. The messages became less about reconciliation and more about survival. "Dad, I lost my apartment. I can't pay the rent without a job. I'm living with Mom. Could you at least consider a little help, just for subsistence?" Edward replied legally, stating that any request for financial support should be formally submitted through the state social welfare system, that I was not responsible for providing sustenance to an adult who had committed crimes against me, that if she needed money, she would have to look for it in jobs that her criminal record allowed her to access. The jobs her criminal record allowed her to access were limited. Unskilled jobs: cleaning, sales clerk in retail stores, customer service in call centers, jobs that paid little, that were exhausting, that did not use her education or previous experience. That was supposed to be part of her lesson. About 6 months after implementing the silence, I received a handwritten letter. It was from Emily. Her handwriting was different from what I remembered. Slower, more careful, as if each word cost her effort. The letter said, "Dad, I don't know if you will read this. Probably not, but I need to write it anyway. I have spent the last 6 months in the quietest hell I can imagine. Every day you don't respond is a day that reminds me exactly who I am now: a criminal, a disappointment, someone who lost her father. I've been working as a cleaner in a hospital. I clean toilets. I empty trash. I earn little more than minimum wage. My friends from college don't answer my messages. Jason got married again 2 months ago. Mom says to wait. That eventually you will get tired of being furious. But I think I finally understand that it's not about being furious. It's about me having become someone you don't want to know. Someone who is a stranger. And the worst part is, I completely understand why. I don't expect forgiveness. I know that's too much. I just wanted you to know that I understand what I did. It's not just that I forged your signature or used your money. It's that I betrayed your trust in a way that can probably never be repaired. And I deserve it. Emily." I read the letter only once. Then I burned it in the fireplace. I did not reply, because replying would have meant surrender, a recognition that her suffering had touched something inside me. And it had, but not in the way she expected. It had not softened me. It had confirmed that I was on the right path, because the point was not for her to suffer. The point was for her to understand. And apparently, after 6 months, she was finally beginning to do so. During that period, I was rebuilding my life in ways I had never imagined. I joined a chess club. I started traveling to places I had always postponed: Portugal, the south of France, Italy. I spent time with friends I had known for decades, but whom I had neglected during years of worrying about Emily. I discovered that there was a completely different life available to me once I stopped being defined as a father. A life where my decisions were not shaped by family responsibilities. A life where I could simply be Michael Reed, a 62-year-old man with his own aspirations and desires. It was liberating, and it was devastating at the same time, because liberation came at the cost of losing my daughter. A year after the sentencing, I received news that Emily had applied for and was accepted into a vocational training program. She was learning computer repair. It was a technical, stable job, with potential for growth. It was the kind of thing I would have celebrated if she were anyone else. But she wasn't anyone else. She was my daughter, and that fact simply made everything more complicated. When I found out, I felt no joy for her progress. I felt a deep, silent sadness that she was having to rebuild herself from scratch, learning new skills because her previous opportunities had been destroyed. But that sadness did not move me to contact her. It did not move me to offer support, because forgiving would have meant that her actions had no real consequences. It would have meant that the betrayal could be wiped clean, forgotten, resolved with sincere apologies and time. And I did not want to give her that gift. I had taken everything else from her. At least I could keep the silence for her. At least I could maintain the knowledge that her father, the man who had raised her, loved her, supported her, was now a stranger to her. A stranger who would spend the rest of his days not acknowledging her, not speaking to her, not being part of her life. That was my final answer to her betrayal. Not revenge, just absence, just silence, just the void where fatherly love once was. 18 months after the sentencing, my life had taken on a new shape. A shape that, while not what I imagined in my younger years, had its own coherence and purpose. I had completed an urban renewal project on the outskirts of Chicago that left me deeply satisfied. I had traveled to Istanbul, to Prague, to Boston. I had renewed my circle of friends, people who truly valued me for who I was, not for what I could provide. But while I was building a new and deliberately compartmentalized life, Emily was in the midst of a completely different struggle. Through indirect contacts, I learned about her current life. She worked as a computer repair technician in a small shop in a working-class neighborhood. She earned about $1,200 a month. She lived in a shared rental apartment with 2 roommates to afford expenses. She had refused offers of help from her mother, although she occasionally accepted dinners at Brenda's house. Her life was small, narrow, but apparently functional. What I discovered was that she had begun to live with a keen awareness of her limitations. She did not try to restore her former luxury. She did not seek expensive escapes. She had learned, apparently, to live within new, much more restrictive parameters. But the most interesting thing was discovering that she was in therapy. Apparently, she had found a psychologist who worked at reduced fees through the social welfare system. She went once a week. According to what I could find out, she was working specifically on understanding her own decisions, her dependence on Jason, her inability to set boundaries, her need for approval that had led her to compromise her own values. That surprised me. Not because I expected her to be completely irredeemable, but because it indicated that she was really trying to change, not superficially, but on a fundamental level. When I discovered that, I experienced an unexpected feeling: resentment. Resentment that she was doing exactly what would have been beneficial for her to do. Resentment that her therapy, her work on herself, her apparent growth, was not something I had facilitated or allowed to happen. It was something she was doing completely on her own, without my recognition, without my approval, without any kind of reward from me. Because if she improved, if she really transformed, that meant that the silence, the estrangement, the denial of support was not what had changed her. It was herself. It was her own determination, independent of me. And that was much harder to process than if she had simply been suffering passively, waiting for my forgiveness. At a certain point, about 2 years after the sentencing, I received news that changed things in a way I didn't anticipate. Emily had applied for a small loan to buy a good quality used computer to work from home. The loan had been rejected, of course. With a criminal record and no clean credit history, no bank would lend her money, not even a small amount. She had said it directly to a banker who had been kind to her in the application process. I guess I'll never be able to have what others have. I guess it will be like this for the rest of my life. The banker, according to what I heard, had suggested that maybe a family member could help her. Emily had replied, "My father won't speak to me. I don't even know if he will ever forgive me. So I guess it's in my hands. It's always in my hands now. When I was told that, I felt something break inside me. Not compassion, exactly. It was more of a stark realization that she, finally, had fully internalized the lesson. That she understood there was no safety net, that there was no external salvation, that her life was now entirely her responsibility. And the hardest part was realizing that this was exactly what I had wanted to achieve. That it was exactly what I had set out to do when I filed the complaint, when I cut off financial support, when I implemented the silence. I wanted her to understand that life has real consequences, that actions have real weight, that betrayal cannot be simply excused and forgotten. But now that I had achieved it, I didn't know what to do with it. During a meeting with Edward, I casually mentioned that Emily was working in her therapy, that she was apparently transforming her life. He looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite decipher. "Are you considering reconsidering your position?" he asked. "No," I replied automatically. "I'm just observing, just aware of what is happening. And how does that make you feel?" "I don't know," I admitted. And it was the truth. I didn't know how it made me feel. Because if she was getting better, if she was really changing, then what did my silence mean? Was it justice? Was it revenge? Was it just cruelty disguised as principle? The questions haunted me in ways I didn't expect. 3 years after the sentencing, Emily was promoted from technician to technical supervisor at her computer repair shop. It wasn't an important position, it didn't pay significantly more, but it was recognition of her competence, her reliability. It was proof that she could be someone who could be trusted again, at least in professional contexts. When I heard about the promotion, I did nothing. I didn't call her. I didn't send a congratulatory message. I didn't acknowledge the achievement in any way. But I spent an entire night awake, thinking about it, thinking about how a daughter who was a criminal 3 years ago was now a supervisor, that others trusted to train employees, to manage inventory, to make responsible decisions. And I wondered if maintaining the silence at this point was justice, or if it was simply more pain. Unnecessary pain. Pain that no longer served any purpose except to remind myself of what I had lost. But I did not change my position. I did not call. I did not reconcile. Because reconciling would have meant admitting that perhaps I had gone too far. And I wasn't sure I could admit that. 4 years after discovering the forgery, 5 years after that ordinary Tuesday when Charles Evans called me from the bank, I arrived at a place I did not expect. Acceptance, not forgiveness. Not reconciliation. But yes, a kind of peace that was more like steel than water. That steel had been forged through years of deliberate solitude, of solo trips, of dinners without family, of mornings where I woke up in a silent apartment, knowing there was no one waiting for me, no one who cared if I was alive or dead. It was a painful peace, a peace that was hard to maintain. But it was mine. I had learned to live without Emily in a way that went beyond simple non-contact. I had learned to rebuild my identity in a way that she was not part of its architecture. I was no longer Michael, Emily's father. I was simply Michael, a retired engineer, a traveler, a friend, a man who had suffered a betrayal and who had chosen to live in such a way that the betrayal did not define him, even if his daughter's absence did. My close friends had stopped asking me about Emily years ago. They had learned it was a topic I did not discuss, a pain that was private. My sister, who lived in Boston, occasionally mentioned seeing her on social media, but she knew those updates were not welcome. So the information about Emily reached me less and less frequently, until she practically disappeared from my daily consciousness. That was perhaps the most effective part of the silence. That it allowed someone to simply disappear from your life in the same way someone you distance yourself from on a train journey disappears. First they are close, then they are in the window, then they are a tiny dot in the distance, then they are completely invisible. But there was something in the way Emily had finally accepted her life, something in how she had stopped trying to restore what was lost and had simply started building something new, that resonated with me in ways I couldn't completely ignore. About 4.5 years after the sentencing, I received an invitation to a dinner for former colleagues. It was an event that happened every 2 years. Most of us were retired or semi-retired. Some still worked in consulting capacities. It was an occasion to remember completed projects, to talk about how the cities we had built had evolved. I attended. It was pleasant in small, quiet hours, but what was truly significant happened after the formal dinner, when several of us were at the restaurant bar having coffee and digestives. A colleague named Ramon, someone I had worked with decades ago on a highway project, asked me directly, "How is your daughter, Michael? Emily? I haven't heard you mention her in years." Time stopped for a moment. I looked at my glass of brandy. Then I looked at Ramon. "We don't speak," I replied simply. Ramon didn't press. He just nodded. "That must be hard." It was, I admitted. "Now it's just reality. It is what it is. Will there never be reconciliation?" he asked. I thought about the question. I thought about Emily working as a supervisor in a computer shop. I thought about her going to therapy. I thought about her learning to live without her father's financial support. I thought about how she had finally accepted that there would be no external salvation, that she herself had to be her own salvation. "I don't know," I replied honestly. "Maybe someday, but not now, and probably not in the way she would expect." Ramon drank his coffee. "I guess what matters is that you are both alive, both safe, both trying to live lives that have some meaning." That was all that was said. But something in those words stayed with me for weeks afterward. Because it was true. Emily was alive. She was safe. She was trying to build something of her life. And I was alive. I was safe. I was trying to live in a way that was consistent with my values, even if those values had undergone transformations I had not anticipated. It was around that time that I began to recognize something I had been avoiding, that my estrangement from Emily, while it had achieved its initial purposes of making her understand the consequences of her actions, had also damaged me in ways that would take a long time to process. There were nights when I woke up thinking about her as a child, when she was 5 years old, when she would bring me her drawings of absurd constructions that I pretended were brilliant structures, where she would hug me without thinking about it, simply because I was her father and I was there. Those memories became increasingly painful, not because I wanted them to be different, not because I wanted to turn back time, but because they were reminders that something deep and fundamental had been lost, and that this loss was permanent, regardless of whether we ever spoke again. The peace I had built, that metallic peace, required me to live with that acknowledgement. It required me to accept that I had won justice, that I had taught a lesson, that I had protected my autonomy and my dignity, but that the price had been a loneliness that would never be fully mitigated. One day, while walking in Lincoln Park, I saw a couple, a man about my age and a woman who could have been his daughter. They were laughing together. The man was pointing at something on the lake. The woman held his arm with comfortable familiarity, and I felt a pang of something I didn't know how to categorize. Was it envy? Was it regret? Was it simply the weight of what I would never have again? I walked in the opposite direction. I didn't need to see any more of that. I already knew what I had lost. I didn't need to be constantly reminded. But that night, in the solitude of my apartment, I allowed the full truth to emerge. That maybe, just maybe, I had been so focused on making Emily understand the consequences of her actions that I hadn't fully considered my own consequences. That maybe, in my quest for absolute justice, I had executed a punishment that was more severe than the situation really justified. It didn't mean I was wrong to file the complaint. It didn't mean it was wrong to set boundaries. But maybe the perpetual silence, the absolute estrangement, maybe that had been more about me than about her. Maybe it had been my way of ensuring I would never be vulnerable again, even if it meant living in an emotional bunker. And with that recognition came a new kind of peace, not the peace of steel, the peace of someone who finally understands that perfect justice does not exist, that human beings are complicated, that fatherly love is not simple, not easy, cannot always be repaired even when both parties wish it. It has been just over 5 years since that Tuesday when Charles Evans called me from the bank. 5 years since I discovered my signature had been forged. 5 years since my world fractured in a way I thought was final. I am 67 years old now. My hair is completely gray. The lines on my face are deeper. I have lived alone all this time and have come to understand that loneliness is not the opposite of love. It is simply a different condition of existence. Emily is 33 years old now. According to information I occasionally receive without actively seeking it, she has her own apartment shared with the same-sex partner she met in her therapy group. She and this person, whose name is Lucy, have apparently been together for 2 years. Lucy also has a criminal record, though for different reasons. Apparently, they share a mutual understanding about living with the consequences of past actions. Emily still works as a computer repair supervisor, but is now considering starting her own small business, working from home, repairing computers for private clients. She has small savings. She is not rich, but she is self-sufficient in a way she probably never was when she had access to my financial support. What is interesting is that she no longer tries to contact me. The attempts ended about 3 years ago. After 5 or 6 years of calls, messages, letters, she finally seemed to understand that there would be no answer, that I had built a wall that would not be torn down by persistence or sincere remorse. That recognition was both a relief and a defeat for me. I have come to understand that the lesson I intended to teach her was received, but not in the way I had imagined. It was not about the value of money or the importance of abstract honesty. It was about something more fundamental. That actions have consequences that cannot be negotiated. That trust, once broken, cannot be restored simply with time or repentance. That sometimes, when you cross certain thresholds, there is no return. She learned that lesson, and in the process I did too. What I have reflected on extensively during these years is whether it was justified, whether my course of action was right, and the honest answer is, it depends on what one understands by right. Was it right legally? Filing a case against someone who has committed fraud is appropriate. Laws exist for a reason. Was it right as an act of self-preservation? Setting clear boundaries, protecting my assets, ensuring I could not be a victim of further exploitation. All of that was right. But was it right as a father? That is the question that still keeps me awake some nights. A father can have boundaries. A father can set consequences. A father can even withdraw support if necessary. But is there a limit to what a father should be willing to lose to maintain his dignity? Is there a point where the lesson is so severe that it surpasses the purpose of the teaching? I think perhaps so. I think perhaps I have lived on the other side of that point for the last 5 years. I am not suggesting I should have forgiven easily. I am not suggesting the forgery was a minor mistake that should have been overlooked. What I am suggesting is that maybe there was a way to handle this that would have preserved something of our relationship, even if it was small, even if it was conditional, even if it was mainly limited to occasional communications. But I did not take that path. I took the path of absolute silence, and now I must live with the consequences of that decision just as she must live with the consequences of hers. What I have finally learned, after 5 years of reflection and loneliness, is that perfect justice does not exist, that real forgiveness does not mean everything is forgotten or that you trust in the same way, that fatherly love can be conditional without being non-existent, that it is possible to be furious with someone, to be disappointed with someone, to set firm boundaries with someone and still recognize their humanity. But I have also learned that sometimes the price of certain principles is too high, that sometimes victory feels indistinguishable from defeat when you look at what was sacrificed to obtain it. If I could go back 5 years, would I do something different? I don't know completely, but I know I would do some things differently. I would not have been weaker in my boundaries, but perhaps I would have been more compassionate in my execution of those boundaries. What I know for sure is that Emily learned that actions have permanent consequences, that the world is not forgiving, that mistakes can define the rest of your life if you make them seriously enough. That was the lesson, and it was taught effectively. But the price of that lesson was that my daughter spent 5 years believing her father had completely abandoned her, that she spent nights wondering if he would ever speak to her again, that she built an entire life without me, not because she was strong, but because she had no choice. Was that necessary? Probably not. Was it fair? Depends on how you define justice. Was it effective? Absolutely. She understood. Now, at 67 years old, living alone with a daughter who exists more in my memories than in my present life, I can say that I have achieved exactly what I intended to achieve when I filed the complaint. I have ensured that my daughter understood that betrayal has a price that cannot be paid with money or apologies. But I can also say that I am not sure if that achievement was worth what it cost. This is my story. The story of a man who was betrayed, who responded with justice, who learned that justice and forgiveness cannot always coexist, who learned that setting boundaries is important, but that absolute boundaries can become walls that trap us as much as they trap others. Emily will live the rest of her life knowing that she forged documents, that she defrauded her father, that she lost something she can never fully recover. I will live the rest of my life knowing that I had a daughter, that she did something unforgivable, and that I chose a forgiveness so conditional it became non-existent. We both paid a price, we both live with consequences that do not disappear, and we both, I hope, have learned something important about who we are when we face the deepest fractures of trust and love. If there is one lesson I can leave, it is this: that betrayal is real, that harm is real, that boundaries are necessary, but also that revenge disguised as justice can cost more than we are prepared to pay, that there are ways to teach lessons that do not require the total destruction of one who is loved. My daughter learned the lesson, but we both paid a price that, in retrospect, would have been preferable to avoid. That is the truth I have learned to accept in these 5 years of silence. If you liked this story, give the video a like, subscribe to William's Revenge Stories, and share your thoughts in the comments. To hear the next story, click the box on the left. Thanks for watching.